There is a highly destructive, agonizing behavioral cycle that plays out across countless relationships, leaving the human mind entirely exhausted, disoriented, and emotionally broken. It begins with an intense period of absolute validation. Someone enters your life, showers you with attention, and makes you feel entirely seen, safe, and valued. But the exact moment you begin to let your guard down, the exact moment your central nervous system calms down and accepts the connection, they perform an abrupt, freezing emotional retreat. They become cold, distant, and completely unresponsive to your presence. In clinical psychology, this toxic behavioral loop is known as the push-pull dynamic, or the anxious-avoidant trap. It is a highly sophisticated subconscious mind game that operates entirely beneath the surface of conscious awareness. To the individual caught in the trap, it feels like an exhausting puzzle that must be solved at all costs through your computer workspace or phone screen. But beneath the surface, it is a structural defense mechanism. The person pulling you close is not trying to build a stable future. They are trapped in a primitive survival loop where intimacy triggers immediate panic, forcing them to push you away, simply to protect their own fragile ego from the terrifying vulnerability of being truly known. This profound relationship breakdown is driven by a mechanism known in attachment theory as attachment style incongruity. When an individual matures inside an environment where emotional safety is entirely unpredictable or intrusive, their subconscious mind wires a contradictory set of survival instructions. They develop what clinical psychologists define as an avoidant attachment style. To the conscious ego, these individuals genuinely believe they want love, companionship, and deep human connection. But the moment true intimacy begins to manifest, their predictive brain misinterprets the emotional closeness as a catastrophic threat to their personal autonomy and sovereignty. The mind enters a state of severe internal crisis. It does not consciously decide to execute a mind game or hurt your feelings. Your brain simply executes an automated defensive maneuver to lower its sudden internal anxiety. It pulls the plug on its emotional warmth and creates artificial distance, treating your natural desire for connection as an immediate, life-threatening trap that must be escaped simply to secure personal safety inside their own internal fortress. To see why this push-pull dynamic holds such a devastating lock over human consciousness, we must look at the neurobiology of romantic rejection and the dopamine reward system. When modern neuroscientists place individuals who are experiencing relationship mind games inside brain scanners, they observe a terrifying neural event. When a partner suddenly pulls away and goes silent, it triggers an intense wave of activity inside the user's nucleus accumbens, the exact neural pathway responsible for processing severe chemical addiction and intense physical cravings. The sudden unpredictability of their affection transforms the relationship into an intermittent reinforcement engine. This is the exact same biological mechanism that anchors a gambling addiction. Your brain drops its production of stable serotonin and enters a state of hyper-vigilant obsession, flooding your system with adrenaline and cortisol. The mind becomes entirely blind to everything else in your daily life, forcing your thoughts to loop endlessly around the silent partner simply to secure a single drop of validation that will stop the agonizing chemical withdrawal. When this intense neurochemical anxiety takes hold during the pull phase, the victim's subconscious mind deploys an aggressive psychological shield known as projective rationalisation. This is an automated defensive maneuver where the anxious brain actively attempts to invent logical excuses and false narratives simply to justify why the other person has suddenly become cold and distant. The ego cannot handle the raw, destabilizing reality of being rejected without cause. To protect your pride from the terrifying possibility that you are completely powerless in this dynamic, your mind performs a catastrophic distortion of history. It begins pointing the finger at yourself. It tells a story: if only I hadn't sent that text, if only I'd been more patient, or if I change my behavior, surely they will return to the way they were in the beginning. Notice how the mind uses self-blame as an emotional shield to maintain an illusion of control over a toxic situation. This process happens entirely beneath your conscious awareness, leaving you completely blind to the reality that their coldness is an internal defect of their own psychology, not a reflection of your worth. The primary weapon an avoidant individual uses to reinforce this emotional distance is a process called hyper-vigilant flaw-finding. When the relationship progresses to a point where true vulnerability is required, the avoidant partner's subconscious demands an immediate escape hatch to lower its internal panic. To achieve this without looking like the villain, their intellect aggressively scans your character, your habits, and your appearance to find a disqualifying defect. They will suddenly become hyper-focused on a minor disagreement, a slight behavioral quirk, or a difference in lifestyle, amplifying it into an insurmountable deal-breaking incompatibility. The clash between their private fear of intimacy and their public persona as a logical person creates severe cognitive dissonance. To resolve this internal agony, their mind uses rationalisation to turn their primitive fear of closeness into an act of high standards of maturity. They convince themselves that the relationship must end simply because you are fundamentally flawed, choosing the cold safety of a solitary existence today over the emotional risk of building a life together tomorrow. Alongside flaw-finding, the avoidant mind utilizes a secondary, highly passive filter known as phantom X idealization. Once the partner has successfully pushed you away and secured their isolation, their anxiety levels drop back down to normal. However, the human brain still experiences a natural hunger for connection. To satisfy this hunger, without facing the actual risks of real-world intimacy, their subconscious performs a dark calculation. It creates an intense obsession with a past relationship or an unavailable imaginary ideal. They tell themselves a story that their previous partner was their absolute soulmate, completely editing out the flaws and conflicts of that past connection. This filter ensures that their mind actively blocks out the value of the person standing right in front of them, while overemphasizing the perfection of a phantom that can never return. Phantom idealization transforms their mental landscape into a blank space where real-world vulnerability feels entirely unnecessary, allowing them to remain completely blind to the reality that they are weaponizing a ghost simply to keep their heart permanently locked away from the living. These abstract biological filters manifest daily in devastating real-world loops, the most common of which is the trap of the digital breadcrumb trail. In our modern digital landscape, an avoidant individual does not need to completely cut contact to maintain control. They use the continuous connectivity of your phone or computer workspace to execute a low-risk hoovering strategy. They will go silent for weeks, and then suddenly, like a picture, send a casual meme or text a vague question out of nowhere. This behavior is defined in clinical psychology as breadcrumbing. It is designed to test your boundaries and confirm that they still hold total access to your mental real estate without ever having to offer actual commitment, consistency, or emotional safety. When your predictive processing engine encounters these mixed signals, it enters an immediate state of hyper-focused analysis. You spend hours sitting at your desk trying to decode the hidden meaning behind a single notification, entirely blind to the reality that the manipulator is simply feeding you just enough emotional crumbs to keep you anchored on their sideline while they enjoy the safety of their distance. We see this exact same self-sabotage playing out through the destructive pattern of the triangulation shield. When an avoidant person feels that your natural intimacy is becoming too intense for their survival network to handle, they will actively introduce a third variable into the relationship dynamic to break the proximity. This third variable, known as an anchor of triangulation, can be a demanding new career goal in their workspace, and sudden obsession with a hobby, or the deliberate introduction of a rival romantic interest. By constantly shifting their attention, time, and focus to this external factor, They construct an absolute barrier that prevents you from ever achieving a stable, deep connection with them. This process creates a profoundly hollow relationship. When you question the distance, they turn the tables, accusing you of being needy, demanding, or insecure, entirely convinced that their hyper-focus on this external variable is simply a sign of high ambition or a busy life. Your brain uses the fear of conflict to accept the arrangement, sacrificing your standard of love today just to secure the temporary comfort of staying in their orbit. When this collective avoidance and push-pull behavior scales up across an entire culture, it produces the highly unique phenomenon of hyper-individualism and relational decay. Humans are profoundly social creatures, but when an entire generation or digital community becomes hyper-obsessed with total autonomy and treats emotional dependence as a sign of weakness, independent intimacy is treated as a social trap. People stop evaluating relationships based on shared depth, growth, and history, and begin evaluating them solely based on whether they require personal sacrifice or trigger internal discomfort. This collective blindness is the ultimate catalyst for the modern epidemic of loneliness and systemic social fragmentation. A society does not lose its connection because it is overrun by external threats. It slides into isolation because ordinary citizens choose to view vulnerability as a dangerous liability, violently attacking or ghosting anyone who dares to ask for genuine accountability, turning a population into a synchronized herd of isolated islands that will gladly sacrifice true human love simply to protect the fragile, unmonitored ego from the fear of being seen. The true danger of entering a push-pull relationship is that it constructs a perfectly closed, self-fulfilling cognitive loop that entirely blinds you to your own loss of agency. The cycle begins the moment you accept the mixed signals, allowing the avoidant partner back into your space after a period of cold withdrawal. This high-stress environment creates immediate subconscious pressure to perform, forcing your brain to reduce activity in its logical and self-protective networks. Because your internal boundaries are lowered by the fear of loss, you choose compliance, overextending your energy to win back their affection. To clear the immediate wave of exhaustion, your mind instantly deploys projective rationalisation, convincing your conscious ego that the dynamic is simply a sign of an intense, passionate, or fated connection. This failure to stand for your own emotional safety is then used by your predictive engine as a new, acceptable baseline for the future. When the next cycle of withdrawal and pull arrives, your mind looks at its past data and says, "We survived the cold silence before, so it is safe to play the game again," permanently locking you in a loop of trauma dependency. Dismantling this matrix of emotional mind games requires a rare, aggressive practice known as radical disengagement. You cannot simply wish your trauma bonds away. Your brain's predictive engine demands hard physical data points of absolute boundary enforcement to override its automated survival networks. This reprogramming begins by learning an extraordinary truth uncovered in attachment psychology. You cannot heal an avoidant individual by offering them more love, more patience, or more compliance. You can only break the cycle by choosing to completely step off the game board. The next time a toxic presence triggers your anxiety by withdrawing their warmth or sending a cold breadcrumb, do not look to their mixed signals for validation. Recognize that your rising heart rate is your amygdala firing a compliance alarm. Force your physical body to execute an absolute blackout. Stop the chasing behaviors. Refuse to audit their digital footprint and match their distance with an absolute unyielding wall of silence. By choosing to hold your ground, you shock your predictive engine, providing an immediate data point that proves your survival is not dependent on their validation. Stepping away from the game board and choosing your own emotional sanity is an act of supreme psychological heroism, because it forces you to face the raw neural pain of chemical withdrawal, sudden isolation, and absolute public visibility. Your brain will fight this process at every single turn, desperately screaming at you to check the screen, solve the puzzle, and accept the comfortable shared illusions of the push-pull loop, simply to keep your ego safe from the agony of closing the door forever. But now that you know the anatomy of the trap, now that you understand how your subconscious mind uses attachment-style incongruity, intermittent reinforcement, and hyper-vigilant flaw-finding to turn you into an unthinking echo, the game has lost its lock over your consciousness. You can choose to step out of the illusion and view your reality with absolute unyielding clarity. This navigation of your subconscious architecture is a lifelong education, and your brain utilizes dozens of other invisible neural mechanisms every single day to dictate your choices and trap you on autopilot without your consent. If you are ready to shatter the rest of these hidden mental loops, discover how your mind fakes reality, and unlock the true mechanisms of your subconscious, click on the playlist appearing on your screen right now. We have built an entire archive of long-form psychological deep dives designed explicitly to help you look past the self-delusions of your ego. Click through, explore the library, and take absolute control of your psychology.